welcome everyone to the meeting tonight. We're here tonight to talk about options to manage growth at the elementary schools due to rising enrollment. Before we begin, I just wanted to say a few words. I've been on the board for a while now, and I've been thinking back to some of the awful events that have happened during this recent board service. In 2020, we were all able to view the senseless murder of George Floyd and the inhumanity that was shown him. And at that time, we could all empathize with how brutally George Floyd was treated. And after that, there was the murders of workers in a spa in Atlanta who were targeted because they were of Asian descent, AAPI. And we heard from our AAPI students about Asian hate. And there was a lot of aggression towards Asian people at that time because of the pandemic and concerns that the virus was caused by China. Then we had the school shootings in Uvalde, Texas, and we all had to process that together, and just the inhumanity that we witnessed. And then most recently, this past Saturday, we've all seen the murder and kidnapping and raping videos of innocent Israeli women, children, babies, elderly, and disabled by Hamas, who is a known terrorist organization. Whatever your political beliefs are, I don't think this is a question of political beliefs, but please know that your Jewish friends and neighbors are hurting right now. We have many Israeli families in our community. Some families are affiliated with the Institute for Advanced Study or the university. So as a community, we've always come together, and I hope we can come together now with a shared understanding of what was lost by the Israeli people and the Jews last Saturday night. Hate is hate. Whatever the reason or whatever group is a target, we can never accept it. So now I'm going to turn the meeting over to Beth and, oh, hello, Beth, you got on, and Brian McDonald, as co-chairs of the Long-Term Planning Committee. They're going to lead the discussion on our planning options, and then we are going to allow time for public comment. So Beth and Brian.
Sure, I'll
Thank
start
you,
us off. Are you good?
Go for it, Brian. Thank you.
I just wanted to begin by thanking the members of the Long-Term Facilities Planning Committee who are all here, Beth, my co-chair, and Susan Cantor, Michelle Tuck-Ponder, Jean Durbin, and also fellow trustees who are joining us tonight. I want to thank Dr. Tu and Dr. Kelly for an awful lot of hard work, which is ongoing. And I want to thank our professionals for their work, and a special thanks to Matt. The board is usually engaged in three types of kind of high-level planning. That's academic planning, which is led by our senior administrators and our student achievement committee of the board. Financial planning and facilities planning, both of which primarily happen with the operations committee of the board and with our business administrator, Mr. Bolden. Tonight's presentation really integrates all three types of planning as we talk about what the future might look like as we prepare to manage expanded enrollment. So with that, I'll just hand off to Matt and ask Matt if you might be able to introduce some of our professionals.
Great, thank you, Brian. I appreciate that. So with us tonight, we have our new architectural firm, for FVHD, George Duthie is principal. Welcome, George. Thanks for jumping on board this summer quickly. And also, Mike Zuba has been so concurrent to me coming to the Princeton Board of Education. The board was in the process of hiring Mike's predecessor firm. As a planner, he has tons of experience, a lot in Southern Connecticut, but all up and down the Eastern Seaboard. Mike Zuba, and he's been working now for 4 years with us, helping to guide us and direct us and redirect us numerous times. Very helpful to have an experienced planner. So with that, I'll hand it over to Mike Zuba. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you, everybody. For tonight, we have about a 7-slide presentation. I'm going to run us through not only the background, but walk through the Long-Term Facility Planning Committee's process that we went through to bring forward a recommendation tonight. And then later on, we'll go through any Q&A that we have on anything presented and anything that may have been discussed as part of that process. So with that, I'm going to begin sharing my screen. Hopefully everybody can see, get that into full screen. Hopefully everybody can see the screen and it's nice and clear. So as part of tonight, I think we'll start with the planning background. As Matt mentioned, I came on board about 4 years ago to conduct the master plan prior to COVID. We began that process really in the latter parts of the fall of 2019. There was a comprehensive facility master plan. We really began studying enrollment capacity, enrollment drivers, the facilities themselves. And then that process really went through a little bit of a pause, like everything else did in the world through COVID, and then was reignited back in the latter parts of 2020 and early parts of 2021, in which we made a recommendation to the board. And then flash forward to 2023 and really the beginning parts of 2023 into the spring, the board restarted the planning process. So as part of that, back in 2019, we saw a lot of residential growth, a majority of that coming through the fair share housing, but also additional growth outside of that. 1,100 new units are planned and are underway. There's construction happening in various parts of the community. Enrollment is going to continue to grow from that. One of the major values has always been to provide appropriate school facilities for the students. Flexible learning environments, I think, are very important in looking at buildings that are of an older vintage. A lot of the learning environments aren't as flexible as they need to be. So ensuring that we have the proper environment, we have proper spaces, we can be able to meet 21st century learning objectives and have collaborative type spaces is a very important part of this process. As we started working through this in the spring, the board directed the administration to really, as part of the master plan, to be able to focus on the elementary and focus on solutions for the growth at the elementary and middle school. Within the next 10 years, the pre-K-5 enrollment is projected to exceed 1,500 students. The middle school is projected to exceed 920 students. So be able to provide a plan that brings additional capacity across the board to be able to provide that as student population grows over the next 5 to 10 years is really one of the big parts of what we're going to talk about, and was one of the big parts of driving this process. Taking a step back, and as a planner, we like to be able to, we either term things down in the weeds or getting at the 10,000 or 15,000 feet of elevation. So kind of taking a step back and looking at our high level master planning considerations. So really looking at that 15,000 foot level. This planning process really wanted to have a value-based planning. It needs to be able to support the mission statement of Princeton Public Schools. It needs to be able to support the district's goals on the very high level, but also getting down into the individual buildings themselves, be able to support that building leadership goals as well as the goals for the individual school communities. We need to be able to have prudent stewardship as well. My experience, one of the big parts of master planning
Mike,
and school construction.
Mike,
Yep.
Your screen has switched.
Oh, thank you for pointing that out, because I would have just kept going. Let me try that again. Is that
There you
better?
go. That's
All
it.
right. Sorry about that. I wanted to bring it over. I thought I was able to duplicate it. So
Thanks.
in my experience, and I've been doing master plans for over 20 years, a lot of the master planning through a lot of the East Coast results in referendums and having the community support. So always a big part is balancing the building needs themselves, the school community needs, with taxpayer affordability. It becomes one of those things that you have to be able to have those conversations around it, knowing that the schools are a major asset. It's not just an asset for the individual school communities themselves, those that have children in the community, but it's also an asset for those that don't have children in the community, or for those that may have already brought their children through the school system, and those that have kids that may be up and coming or planning families. So really be able to have community support is a big part of a plan. You want to have a lofty aspirational plan, but you also want to have that plan be very balanced, knowing that there's going to be some tax implications for it, no matter what the construction is, no matter what those necessary improvements are going to be. In a community that already has existing tax levies that are rather high, with the schools making up about 50% of that, it becomes even a little bit more polarizing of a topic as part of that, and be able to talk through that. And a plan really doesn't go anywhere if it can't pass referendum. If you don't have that broader community support, you may have the best laid plan, but it's important to be able to, have a process that is transparent, that it is open to community input, to ensure that everybody has buy-in in that plan, especially when it comes time to be able to have a taxpayer vote for that as part of the referendum process. And we know that the Princeton community has a large majority of taxpayers that do not have students enrolled in the public schools, but also, as I mentioned earlier, the schools are beyond just the children that they're educating. They're things that preserve our property values. There's things that make it the community that it is today. And without investment in the schools, it would be hard pressed for Princeton to be Princeton, especially from Princeton public school standpoint. Financial sustainability was a major consideration, not only from a one-time construction project, but also from an operational budget, knowing that there's a 2% levy cap, and that there's other fixed costs rising. They're rising in our own home lives, it's rising in school operations, it's rising in all levels of government and corporate operations. In the schools themselves, that's transportation, salaries and benefits for staff, inflation. Each year, it's a struggle to find additional savings in order to be able to keep providing the levels of service that are needed, and being able to draft the plan where you're taking into consideration what not only the current fiscal climate is, but also what it's going to look like down the road is very important. And, with any plan that's going to have some change in the community, you want to be able to be cognizant of that. You want to be able to minimize the family disruption, staff disruption, and most importantly, the disruption of the current students, as well as the student body as a whole. So you want to be able to have support there and be able to do it in a manner that you're able to effectuate some positive change, but also minimize the impact to the greatest extent possible. As part of the process, we always want to be able to put the process on a bit of a, we want to establish some parameters so that we can stick to the task at hand. Not only that's the board's resolution of focusing on elementary and middle, but also be able to have some planning parameters around that. So one of our charges was to accommodate future growth. That includes not only the organic growth through the demographics that are in the school system themselves and families moving in, but also growth from future housing. Develop a financially prudent construction program, and that's working with George and his team to be able to get an understanding of those construction costs, the overall construction implications, the high level order of magnitude, and where we were moving along in this process in July, and George had come on board right around then. So bending his ear to be able to get some information on what the likely construction cost looks like. I know he's further along today than he was back when he first got engaged as the district architect. We want to be able to support those financially and cost-effective, sustainable facility operations. We also want to be able to look at improving transportation, improving walkability. There's no surprise, busing ever since COVID, there's been a lot of changes, not only in Princeton, but across probably most of the communities that I work in and most of the communities my peers work in from a transportation standpoint. So looking at a way to be able to have improvements there and improve walkability. Also to be able to maintain the DLI program at 2 sections per grade. We understand that there will need to be down the road an enrollment policy put in place to be able to have a system to be able to funnel kids into that DLI program, and then be able to pair it at least with 2 traditional tracks for viable facility use. So when you have a bit of a tweener school where you only have 3 sections per grade, especially when you account for all the other support spaces that are necessary for a school, such as is in the existing CP, it's difficult to be able to have that two different tracks and that traditional track to be able to have that offering for those students that may live in the CP attendance zone but may not want to partake in the DLI program. So that became a very important parameter. And that 4-section per grade school with the 2 and 2 tracks became a very important component of what we were planning around. And then to be able to take a look across the board at all the facilities and be able to not only look at the demographics, but look at the housing that is currently either under construction, currently approved, or still in the planning process, and be able to create a plan that broadly aligns the enrollment with the available space across the board, so that each school will have some headroom at the end of this implementation for this master planning process, but also that should there be any additional development that's occurring beyond what we're able to see now or know about now, that there's headroom to be able to accommodate those students. So really be able to provide space where it's needed, and then space where it's likely going to be needed, and provide headroom across the board at the elementary facilities. We started, again, getting back into, now I'll say it's about 10,000 foot level, some different planning approaches. As part of our meetings going back to the mid to late spring and through June, we talked about these different approaches, and then we've refined some of these approaches. We've brought some of the approaches over from the prior master planning effort that I was involved with. Also, as part of additional input and additional thinking and discussion, as part of the committee, we evolved those approaches. So really always on the table is status quo. It's not really do nothing because you're doing something, but it's not having any real sweeping changes. And it does have both capacity consequences and fiscal implications. So we had a lot of discussions on what that status quo would look like and what would happen if status quo were in place for the foreseeable future. We also explored this dual track school. We looked at it from a 4-section per grade as well as a 5-section per grade. We also looked at having the 5-6 school and what that would mean becoming a pre-K 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12 model. And then what was recommended as part of, I believe it was in the spring of 2021, was the sister school model, which looks at pairing the schools pre-K 2 and 3, 5, sistering them together. So you would have larger grade cohorts, and students would have half their elementary experience in one building and half in another building that is paired together. The 4 different approaches were evaluated through an iterative process throughout the different meetings that we had with the facilities planning committee. We wanted to be able to evaluate them all across the same lenses. So we established these 6 different lenses for assessing them: educational impact, operational cost, construction and construction cost, enrollment balancing and future growth, community disruption, and then walkability. And as we were going through and discussing, we've always had these lenses in the back of our mind, and we were going through the process of saying, well, does it do its best here, or should we make some adjustments? And throughout the process, we did many adjustments to these planning approaches, which ultimately yielded us these various planning scenarios. So I know this may be a little bit tough to read, so I'm going to work from left to right and kind of talk our way through the process that we went through. And there's also scenarios that were kind of sub-options and tweaks, I shall call them, under each of these, that we looked at little different nuances in order to be able to kind of lead us in a certain direction in decision making. And really kind of as we went through this over the last several months, really everything was on the table, and we were really evolving our discussion around each component and getting a little bit deeper into the various level of detail in discussion and analysis. This is just really a means of best simplifying it and trying to give a flavor or a little taste of everything that went into our conversations as we worked our way through this process. So looking on the far left, just looking at status quo alone, we know we're at near 100%, or we'll be approaching 100% district-wide capacity. We also know that we have some capacity, especially at CP, that's not fully utilized. But the challenge is to be able to utilize that roughly 1 additional section per grade across the buildings, and we know
Mike.
we have enrollment pressures at Littlebrook as well as Johnson Park.
Mike,
Yes.
Mike, it's Jean. I'm sorry to interrupt. I was wondering if we could hear from Beth and Brian before you launch into this about the process that got
Okay.
us to these items. Could Beth or
Sure.
Brian chime in on that for a second? Thanks.
And if you want me to go back a slide, I'm happy to do that, Beth and Brian.
Brian, do you want to go to Brian, or do you want me to?
You can go ahead.
Well, I guess as we've shown in the first slides, we had a number of meetings where we tried to, with the public, where we tried to say, as Mike outlined, our parameters and our values. And then we asked our professionals to kind of give us input on these different models that we talked about in the spring. I think Mike's kind of given the description of how we did that. And we're trying to find the best way to offer a rubric to put them side by side and really work through them to see what stood out. And we weren't sure what exactly would, because we in particular didn't know the construction costs. And I think we're still working on those. And it'll be interesting, Mike, if you can give us some sort of ballpark when we talk about these dollar signs, so we know the magnitude of some of these costs, because they were quite striking. So this is really our best effort to put in front of the public our thought process, our work process, so you can see how we came to our recommendation. It's a very difficult slide to understand, and we've talked over and over again how we could possibly make it easier to grasp, but I think the presentation will be available online. People can look at it and kind of noodle over it. And I think we've mentioned we're having another meeting on Saturday in person where we'll present exactly the same thing and then have another opportunity to talk about it in person. Brian, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I would just note that we're very grateful for the input we received from parents when we visited the 4 elementary school PTOs in the spring. And also we're grateful for the parents and the staff members who participated in a survey that provided some very valuable information. And I'm again grateful for the board members who've worked incredibly hard on this for the past 7 months.
And we also walked this through in the last 3 weeks with the administration, with our staff, with the PTOC. Am I missing anybody? We were trying to think about how we could bring this to the public and try to get everybody. Everybody wants to have a crack and look at this, and we all have many different ideas. And even in the board level, we're always talking about these things, and you can go in any one direction and just get lost. So I've always said right now, we're just trying to get to a path. We haven't made any final decisions. We don't know what things are going to look like exactly. We just need to make a decision to ask our professionals to get moving on one path. And that's really all we're doing here. And we'll show you in the next slide kind of how things are going to happen from here on. But we have to kind of think about one thing at a time so we can keep moving forward. The worst thing we could do is get lost and lose time and lose another year and have even more time of transition, which is going to be challenging for all of us. So I think we should just let Mike go through this and hear what he has to say. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Beth and Brian. I think one of the key things is we don't have fully developed schematic, even concept designs for anything yet. It's still very early. This is just the scenario. As we get into the scenario, the architects and George and his team are trying to catch up now and trying to be able to really kind of develop it out a little bit further. We were going through from a scenario standpoint, looking at things from not only a high level, but getting down into some details, but not getting into the development of what would be exactly inside each of the areas of a building. It wasn't done to that level of detail. When we look at status quo and really that approach of not adding any construction or expansion, especially at the elementary level, we would be over 100% capacity, and we would be looking at rezoning future housing as needed, redistricting to rebalance enrollment on an as needed basis. We would still be struggling with increasing disparities in enrollment across the buildings, disparity in class sizes. And when you have unequal enrollment pressures, you always have shifting of programs and specials, and you have a general reduction in those resource and support spaces. DLI would struggle to continue under the status quo consideration. We also looking at it from a walkability standpoint. It would be inefficient due to zoning and the continued out of area placement. So there's students that get transported with, to the DLI from all different parts of Princeton, but there's also students who live within Community Park that, because there isn't a neighborhood component to Community Park right now, also get transported to other elementary schools. And I believe that's also at the cost of the district. So that kind of touches on not only that walkability lens, but also getting into that operational cost. Looking at the 5-6 school, that would provide additional headroom. So looking at that pre-K4 alignment for the elementary schools, it would help there by providing headroom. And I'll say all the options when I look at the community disruption, they all displace about 25% of the elementary students. And this isn't a formal redistricting. This is just doing it conceptually, looking at students where they've resided and where they historically resided, and be able to create some concept zones to be able to then understand what that impact is for the various lenses, including the busing, operational costs, walkability, educational impact. But they all were about the same, at about a quarter of the student body would be impacted. It would also have a grade reconfiguration, which would introduce an additional transition. The construction of a new 5-6 school would be the most costly option. It would likely occur on the Valley Road site, and it could be a lengthy design approval and construction process. We could talk a little bit more about that in the Q&A if there's any questions for George or Matt or myself on that. And it would still require an addition at CP in order to be able to support a dual track with the appropriate number of full-size classrooms and resource spaces. It would have age-appropriate grade groupings for more rigorous curricula. There are expanded enrichment opportunities as well as athletic opportunities, and it would be able to continue to support that DLI program, especially with the CP addition. It would add an additional layer of busing with the 5-6 school. So with each one of these, and I probably should have started there, there's some considerations that move the needle in a positive direction, and there's always some considerations that move the needle in a different direction. So you're trying to weigh the pros and cons of each as you kind of work your way through this process. There isn't any single scenario that provides great benefits. It's the least costly construction-wise and is the greatest efficiency to operate. That's why it becomes a difficult process. And it's not just here, it's every planning process. You're trying to be able to strike that balance and identify, especially through a rubric like this, which of those are the most important as part of that process. So looking at the sister school, it does provide limited headroom, so a little bit better than the status quo with the additions that would be needed at those schools. However, you provide greater level of efficiency. So when you have a greater number of grades grouped in a single building together, you always have greater parity in class size. You're able to get closer to your class size guidelines or targets. You're able to staff the building more efficiently than if you have a school that's, say, 2 sections per grade, or like the majority of your buildings, 3 sections per grade. Just because when you're a neighborhood-based school system and you group by address, you group by streets and zones, the demographics don't ever come as neatly packed as that. You always have a grade cohort where it may be a bit of a bubble, and then you'll have a grade cohort that may be spot on, and you're able to divide your sections per grade out perfectly. But you're left to sort of the whim of the demographics that are feeding the schools themselves. So with the sister school, by being able to add a greater number of grade cohorts to a given building, you're able to have a greater level of efficiency from an FTE standpoint. It does require an extra transition, and families that have students that are especially around the transition year, you will be split between 2 different buildings themselves, and it would require some staff relocation based on those different grade groupings and pairings. It would require renovations and additions at all 4 schools. So the construction activity would be spread out. And it's always challenging to spread out construction, especially in a given time frame across 4 different sites, especially when you're trying to be able to add space or it's work that becomes interior to the buildings themselves. So there's some challenges there, but it does provide the greatest level of operational cost efficiency, which was one of those key parameters. There's no evidence for student achievement, but you do have gains in professional collaboration, efficiency, as well as some benefits to special ed and culture and climate improvements. And this would continue to support the DLI program split between community park as well as JP based on those split grade groupings. You would, however, have larger catchments because you're now trying to draw in a smaller number of different grades into a building. So you're going to have to be able to now have catchments that are just say roughly twice the size because you're pairing with another school. So you would have some longer transportation times, and you would have less walkers. Getting into the last 3 as shown in blue are those different dual track options. We looked at the 4-section per grade model at both JP and CP. And then the last one was the 5-section per grade model. So looking at the dual track at JP, it did balance enrollment across all schools, but it did provide a limited amount of headroom at only 97%. So not a tremendous amount of headroom for additional unforeseen growth outside of our planning or projection horizon. That's the same for both the 4-section per grade at JP as well as CP. You do have that 25% redistricting impact, but on top of that, for the community disruption, we're also looking at relocating the DLI program and staff to JP, which would have an additional community disruption. You would require some additions and renovations to JP, as well as still requiring the renovations to Princeton Middle School. Operational costs fall right around that $2 to $3 sign, so nowhere near as efficient as sister school, but not as expensive to operate as the 5-6 school. And this has both that dual track program with that continued DLI program. So really the 2 traditional as well as the 2 DLI. It did provide an opportunity, especially in the 4-section per grade at CP, to have less busing and improving walkability, but in the JP with the DLI there, it had more busing compared to the other option. One of the key drivers in exploring the 5-section per grade was really to be able to provide that 90% headroom at the elementary level, but also when you have a building that is going to have a dual track program and you have 2 sections per grade DLI and 2 sections per grade traditional track I mentioned earlier, it really comes down to some efficiency. So when you have just a traditional neighborhood school at 2 sections per grade, which would be that component at CP, you're always going to have some fluctuations in class sizes, difficulty hitting your class targets there, as well as where you have a bubble, you're going to have the likelihood of requiring some flex space there because you're not going to be able to handle any enrollment bubbles to the degree that you would in a 3-section per grade school. This would require addition and renovation to CP. We're still keeping across the board the renovations to PMS, and then the overall operational cost falls in that $2 to $3 sign. And as part of the rezoning process, as well as part of having a true DLI policy and having a neighborhood component at CP, you would have less busing and improving walkability. Because right now, if you live within the walk shed of CP and you don't want to partake in that DLI experience, you now get on a bus to be able to transition to another elementary school, which does not afford the opportunity to have a walkability to CP. So it would be able to improve upon that. So really looking at that dual track at TP with the 5 sections per grade and the renovations to Princeton Middle School as the recommended option. I think one of the key parts of this is really looking at this big picture timeline and process. I know whenever we talk about a master plan, it's, quickly, when does it happen? And sadly, with any master planning, it's a pretty lengthy process. If this were to go forward from when you get into the master plan, you start looking at what the various components are. You go through your due diligence and feasibility to ultimately when a school opens, it's a number of years. So really kind of recapping that spring and summer, that master planning kickoff that built off of that prior effort. There's been community conversations along the way. There's going to be additional community conversations in various formats over the next several years as this process moves ahead. We explored a range of planning options as we start to be able to get into the fall and winter and really the end of the summer season. We began identifying a preferred option. George and his team came on board to be able to do that more detailed feasibility, concept design, and estimating. We will be looking to update those enrollment projections to be able to support the design as well as ed spec and the grant application to the state. Schematic drawings will be delivered to the project or to the planning board over the next several months. The board will need to be able to draft the resolution authorizing the project and then approve the process to develop ultimately that enrollment policy I talked about for the DLI program. That's going to happen in those next several months. And then ultimately towards I think it's March, and correct me if I'm wrong, Matt or George, I believe it's February or March, somewhere around there of 2024, the project gets submitted to the New Jersey DOE. And then it becomes a process where you're waiting for approvals, determining the eligibility for it, and hearing back from the DOE. Matt, do you have anything to
Mike.
add on that? I know I kind of...
Mike, can I interrupt for a second? Can I ask
Sure.
Beth or Brian or Matt to chime in about why we made the recommendation that we made on the former slide?
Sure.
Jean, I think we're going to have board discussion when Mike is done. If you could just be patient, let him run
Okay.
through and then we'll talk, okay?
Thank you.
Okay, I'll get back into that blue box of that spring, fall of 2024 of the major activities that are going to need to occur then. So based on the New Jersey Department of Ed approvals, the Board of Ed will adopt the resolution for the bond referendum. And then you have to go to the various notice postings and filings, ultimately to be able to go through that entire process to get in a position to be able to have a referendum in September of 2024 for this project. Upon successful referendum, you would go ahead with the design, bidding, and construction for the approved projects. Also, right around the fall of 2025, the board will want to be able to undertake a redistricting process. That could be building upon the concepts that we put together as part of this master planning effort. But this is where the redistricting takes front and center of being able to really go through that process of being able to establish some guiding criteria as part of it, go through option development, go through community outreach, and determine as part of that process exactly what is the level of redistricting that's going to be necessary. That would also be a good time to be able to reevaluate in 2 years from now, has any new developments residentially come online or out in front of the planning board that need to be taken into consideration to be able to help keep that enrollment balance and utilize the latest information. If swing space planning is needed, it should be in alignment with that redistricting plan or a phased redistricting plan. So realizing that with school construction not slated to happen or school opening not slated to happen at the new CP until 27-28, you're going to be monitoring the capacity, monitoring the availability of space that you have in your elementary schools over the next several years, realizing that there are different enrollment pressures spread across the different buildings. Does there need to be a phased plan put in place beforehand? But ultimately, the board would look to be able to adopt that redistricting plan in the fall of 2026 to be able to go through the detailed budget planning necessary. As part of a redistricting, you're resetting the student enrollment across the buildings, you're reestablishing transportation routes, there's staffing considerations, there's other implementation planning, just from a mobilization standpoint. So all of that needs to be able to get done. And then ultimately you'll be going through the process of now opening the new CP school in 27-28. As I look across the bottom, there's been a lot of community engagement and conversations to date of various forms. There'll be more as part of these different elements going forward in this big picture timeline. So that engagement will continue to happen. And with that, I could pass it off to the board if there's any additional information that Brian or Beth or Matt or anybody wants to provide. Feel free to do so. If not, we can have board discussion.
Yeah, I think you did a great job explaining the big picture and going through and really painstakingly, describe the process. And it's a long process that had a lot of twists and turns. The greater good we're always trying to look at the greatest good for the most people. So that guides the process. Brian, did you have any comments on the process overall, or Beth?
I guess I would just say that, the process is reached a point. It's by no means complete. What we hope to do, and we look forward to hearing feedback from our fellow board members and committee members and members of the public, is to be in a position to direct our administration and professionals to really roll up their sleeves and begin the hard work of planning, which is going to be an investment, a very significant investment of time and expense. And during that process, there would be ongoing community engagement with all of our parents, but especially with our elementary school parents and those at Community Park in particular, and with our middle school parents. We haven't really talked much about the expansion at the middle school, but we would plan on expanding the middle school. So there would also be increased capacity, efficiency, and headroom there.
And I'll just second that before we have a wider board discussion. I'm also happy to highlight a couple points that I think might be helpful and that were, from the board perspective, important from the chart. I would just mention, again, this is an incredibly complex process. We've been working on it for 5 years. It's very hard to translate it into a few slides. So we apologize for the complexity of it, but we also want to be transparent about the complexity of it, because we always have people coming up and we have our own good ideas. We say, why not this? Why not that? We've been talking about those things for a number of years and are really trying to represent the voices that we have heard in the community and some that we haven't, that we know are there. I'd also like to remind people we are updating the demographics after the October numbers are in this year again, because we want to continue to do this in a way that meets the need. We don't want to build too much. We don't want to build too little. We want to hit it just right. And we wanted to pick a model that gave us some flexibility so that we wouldn't end up in 2027 just finishing some beautiful buildings and then suddenly not having enough room again. So we want to make sure that these are functional, efficient use of our existing buildings, which is what we've heard from the community for years. And we are trying to take advantage of money that we get back from the state, again, to remind people that when we renovate spaces, we get up to 34% of the debt service costs back from the state. That's money that we've already paid in taxes that goes for schools somewhere in the state, and we might as well bring it back here. If we do new construction, we only get about max 14%, even if that. So even if you take a CP plan, you're going to get a lower amount on the new classes, but you will get, if you renovate the common spaces there, you will get significant amounts back from the state. I think that's very important. I'd also mention why some of the things about the 5-6 that are really, it would be another year. We would have another year to try to adapt to all of this change and not know where to put kids and have to figure out, do we need trailers, all these things. We want to get this done as soon as possible. So another year is a big deal. The operating costs at the 5-6 are a big deal. We do not have extra money. They don't give us any extra money in the budget to build a new school. It would be of 1.5 million or so, I think we estimated, because you need a whole new administrative overlay there. It's very different than the other models and quite a bit more. We would have to find a place. If we only have the Valley Road site is the only place we have for a school right now. The Valley Road site houses our administration parking our buses, which must be parked somewhere within Princeton. We're not allowed to park them anywhere else. We have all of our shop there. We would have to relocate those things and find a place for them and pay for that. And we don't have a plan for that. That's another negative for the Valley Road site. And I just wanted to say those were big issues that I think came up. And CP is the center of the growth that is coming to our community, where however you slice it, when you look at where the developments are planned, and you look at the traffic routes, like 27 being a very big barrier for using the Riverside School more efficiently because crossing kids is tough. You can look between Littlebrook and CP, and CP really is central. There'll be a very large development at Franklin. So that's another reason that I think we found that the CP location was important. And another big point I would just say is everyone's going to say, well, when are we doing next? What's next year? What comes after that? Something that didn't occur to me initially was we have to have a referendum passed. And if it passes, then we go one way. And if it doesn't pass, then we've got to figure out a whole different thing. And we don't want to move children. We don't want to uproot people more than we have to. So we don't want to do anything before the referendum passes that would have to be undone necessarily, right? So it's important to think about the stages of this. And I know everyone wants to know exactly how it's going to go. We don't know that yet. We're going to pick a path and go that way, and then ask our experts, the architecture firm, who, by the way, new architects, I believe they are working. You guys also work for West Windsor, Hopewell, a lot of our neighboring districts.
Ewing, West Windsor, Plainsboro, Hopewell Valley, and in West Windsor, Plainsboro.
We appreciate that because I think you understand us very well. But we have to kind of stage this work, and I just want to give that some of those larger concepts before we go any further. I hope that's helpful. Brian, do we want to have some board discussion now?
Yeah, I see that Jean has her hand up. And I think it'd be great to get board discussion, and then we can open it up to the public. I'm sure we'll have their own perspectives and questions, which we may be able to answer some of tonight.
Great, thank you. What, Jean?
Thanks. I enjoyed being part of this committee and this process for the short time that I've been on the board. I wanted to just stress a couple of things and make clear a couple of points in case it's helpful. So our elementary school planning is separate and apart from the referendum that is on this November's ballot. Separate and apart, distinct things. Second is the way we arrived in committee at the recommendation that was highlighted on this on the sheet with all the columns that Mike went over was a really practical approach based on a few things, and my colleagues will correct me if I've missed something. Growth is here and it's coming in our enrollment. We need to pay attention to timing, because if we lose a year, it's critical in terms of our expenses and bringing in trailers to house children. We will look at board policy to make sure that how we move our children around, if they need to be moved around in light of the growth, is fair and equitable. We have a policy guiding us there. We put first and foremost using our resources that we have in place now, current buildings, current footprints. What can we do to maximize our current space? We will look at, obviously, sustainability. Clearly want to make, where possible, walking and biking safe and accessible. But where we landed with that green box being highlighted is based on the best education, our recommendation at this point, based on the best education facilities that we can provide that our community can afford. Am I right? Is that, did I miss?
That's great. That's very helpful, Jean. Thank you for that quick thumbnail.
Thank you.
Does anyone else on the board want to have any comments, or somebody from the committee, before we move on to public questions? Betsy?
Hi, thanks so much. Thanks to my colleagues and to our administrators. and our consultants for working really hard on what is a very complex issue, and one that all of us think about a lot with the different hats that we wear on the board. I just hope that no matter what path we choose, we learn a lot from peer districts who have done this work. People have redistricted, people have taken a program such as the dual language program or a different type of a program in another district, and perhaps thought about changes in their own planning with those aspects in mind. And I just hope that we look at the lessons learned by other districts as we move forward, because it has been, much of this work has been done by other districts, and perhaps our consultants can help point us in the direction. Our job is to do what's in the best interest of students. And so I look forward to the work ahead to do that. But thanks very much.
Thanks, Betsy. Michelle?
I just wanted to note that we've been actually really talking about this, at least for the 6 years that I've been on the board. And it is, and we put it off, and we had a pandemic. And over the past 6 years, sites that might have been potential sites to build a school or to move Board of Education administrative offices are now off the table. And we really are finally at the point where we have to do something. And I know that in the months of having conversation, what we can afford and maintain the quality of education has been really front of mind. So, I'm glad we're here. I wish we weren't. It's wonderful to have a town so popular that everybody wants to move here and to have an education system that people really want to have their children attend. But it's a big decision, and it's got a lot of moving parts. So I just have enjoyed working with my colleagues to try to come up with the best recommendation that we have based on what we know now.
Thanks, Michelle. How do we want to manage the public comment? Matt, will you manage that, or Daphne?
Sure, I'll do it. So let me see. Can we, I don't know who's first. Okay, let's go to Abe Silverman, please.
Can I just note before we start, there was a message in the chat, perhaps that rubric would be helpful for people, since there isn't a hard copy of that, to have that up while the public is asking questions.
And Matt, can we post this to the website soon so that, and we have a great group of parents and residents who are attending this meeting, but many more who are not, who would love to see it, I'm sure.
Yeah. And so we're going to start with Abe, and there's going to be questions in the chat. We will get to them too.
All right, great. Thanks, everyone. This Abe Silverman, a parent of a kid at the wonderful DLI program, which we love. I was a little bit surprised to hear that after all the feedback and support from the DLI program that I think you all have heard over the past really year since you talked about capping it, that the idea that capping the DLI program was a planning parameter, i.e. an input rather than an output of your analysis. I was wondering if you could talk to that a little bit, because I would have thought that, things like expanding the DLI program would have been one of the things that should have been considered, rather than this sort of artificial attempt to cap the program and make CP into some sort of very large elementary school, that where it would not be a DLI only program. And I have to say, I was candidly a little bit disappointed that after all the feedback, I think the DLI community and CP parents have provided, that was still the default option going into the analysis. So I'd appreciate any thoughts.
Okay, thank you, Abe. Before we go on, Mike, do you have the projections for what the CP enrollment would be?
And actually, along with all the other elementary schools, I think that would be helpful with this model.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're muted, Mike.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to pull that up from my server, so I'll give you a shout when I have that.
All right, thank you. Brian, Beth, do you want to answer that question?
Yeah, I defer to our DLI experts, but what we've been told is that pairing classes is essential. So you either have 2 tracks or 4 tracks. And we, for 10 years, have had insufficient demand to go beyond an average of 2, in some cases, 3 sections. A major effort was made in the past year. And I believe the kindergarten class sizes did not reach the 66, that had been hoped for, reached 53. And I believe there was a recent move in that maybe gets it to 54. But it was not an input or an output, really. It was kind of based on feedback from our educators and an assessment of the demand in this community and a review of how it's working in other communities. For example, in West Windsor, they have 2 DLI programs, each of which has 2 classes. One is Spanish and one is Chinese, I believe. And those are housed in elementary schools with 2 tracks of other students. And they have 3 times the enrollment that we have. So these were important considerations. But I should say that, the DLI program is something that the board's consensus was, it was important to retain it. So the thought was, how can we do that? How can we retain the program, increase capacity, and achieve our goals with respect to capital costs, financial costs, walkability, and sustainability, et cetera?
Yeah, I'll also add that the board also has concern that the demographics of CP don't generally reflect the demographics of the district, and I'll say specifically with regard to special ed, that's a concern. We're a public school. Mike, did you find that number yet?
I'm going to share my screen because that's an easier way.
Okay, great. Thank you.
To do this, so bear with me 1 second.
I'll also note that we didn't plan around the DLI program. The DLI program is a wonderful program that we offer in the district, and we wanted to continue it. But if you put all your classrooms, we have a need for growth. So if you put your classrooms in one space, that doesn't rule out the fact that if future boards decide that there's need to expand, and if they somehow decide a 3-section DLI is feasible, or 4, you have a big enough building to do it, right? But many of the options didn't offer that and restricted it as well. So, I mean, we're not saying, we don't want to put future boards in a situation where, and they might change their mind and they say, it may be in the future that we can't afford a DLI program. And if that happens, we've still we think we've still picked the right solution for whatever the needs of the district are as a whole. Right now, we value the DLI program. We want to continue it. We think it's a beautiful thing. And we feel like this solution allows it to continue. The space is going to be beautiful because we'll have an opportunity to renew some of the common spaces in that building. It really, there's a number of reasons that make this suggestion, this recommendation work for all of these various competing parameters. And that's really what they are. I mean, we have to kind of balance and figure out what the way forward is that suits the larger interests of the whole district.
And
Thank you.
this is just the projections and showing that the 2-section per grade DLI, and this assumes everything else remains the same going forward. So this is just kind of the status quo of a 2-section per grade, noting that 386 capacity, 264 students based on a 2-section per grade. I mentioned earlier, you're kind of left with that tweener space. When you look at a K-5 school, that's 6 classrooms. You're left with 1 classroom that would be available for students that live in the CP attendance zone to choose a traditional track. So one of our parameters was to have at least 2 sections per grade in a traditional track across the board for all of the schools themselves. So that kind of came down to that 2 and 2, or the 2+3 pairing for that. And part of the movement as well, as you can see the projections going out in the future, also required to be able to go through a process of aligning the student enrollment with the facilities themselves, with Littlebrook, Johnson Park, as well as Riverside near capacity, but really Johnson Park and Little Brook being over capacity and not being able to leverage any of the existing capacity within CP due to the existing limitations of CP with only one extra section or one extra classroom available per grade, and
Thank
not
you,
being
Mike.
able to accommodate any bubbles there.
Do you
You're welcome.
have the projections for 27, 28? I'm sorry if I wasn't clear.
For
I think the question is, if this plan were chosen by the board, what would the eventual capacity of each school
Oh.
building be?
all right.
If
Well,
there's,
I just wanted to explain something as this process, I've learned a lot about planning, that, but one of the things intuitively when we started, this district is not a huge district, and with community schools. And one of the things is we can't be beholden to the ebbs and flows and demand for a particular program. So, a lot of people are saying, well, so right now we do have excess capacity there right now. So we added a pre-K class in there for the current year. That's a DLI pre-K. To have a whole school, we just aren't a large enough school to be, have enough space to have, I think I've explained that, but it's very apparent through this process.
And touching on that, Matt, one of these questions is, why are we adding capacity to a school that is not fully utilized? It's not fully utilized because we're trying to accommodate that DLI. It would be fully utilized. It is the center of our town, which is what I love about this idea, is that by building in the center of town, if we're wrong about our projections, you can move lines. Future boards could move lines fairly easily with minimal disruption to the town and adjust for wherever the growth ends up if we're wrong. So, but that's why it's at CP is underutilized currently due to the DLI program.
Right. So do we know what the projections are for 27? Because I thought it was like 500 and something students at CP. But I think there's a rumor going around that number is 600. So if we're able to share what those projections are, that would be helpful. But Mike, let me know when you get it. Let's move on, because we want to make sure we're budgeted for an hour and a half tonight. And I want to make sure that we get through all the questions that we can. Next up, let's go to Katie Dunn, please.
And Daphne, I don't have a clean version to share. I just have my Excel workbook, but the projections in the next 5 years, if this were to go forward, were 597, and those are not for CP with the dual track with the two sections,
Right.
and then
Okay.
the three say it's 597, and this
Right.
hasn't been updated with the October enrollment yet.
Right,
Because we're
okay.
not in the middle of October yet. So it's
and
still
Mike,
based
what
off
about the other three elementary schools? If it were 597 at CP, do we have a projection?
323 at JP, 362 at Little Brook, and 300 at Riverside.
Okay.
And the Riverside would continue to be we continue to contemplate that would be the home of the autism program. So that number is lower because the state limits the number of students who can be in a classroom if they're in that program.
Right.
Correct. It includes those programs staying there at Riverside, correct.
Functional capacity of the building for educational purposes, and George could speak to that ad nauseum, but we won't go there, is much different than the actual size of a building. It's what the programs are. So we've all kind of learned that going through this process.
Okay. Katie?
Hello, I'm Katie Dunn.
I'm sorry. If you could just say the street you live on.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm assuming you're all at Princeton. Thank you.
Yes, and I have students at Little Brook Elementary School and the Princeton Middle School. I'm at 774 Princeton Kingston Road in Princeton. I hope I'm not too jumbled here, but currently, just a question: if you choose DLI, do you get transportation, and do you get the same specials that other elementary schools get? Yes. You are given transportation if you choose
transportation. We know that. I don't know what you mean by the
Okay.
specials.
Dr. Tu, do you
The
have
same specials, meaning
library.
music, music,
Yeah.
library, art,
Okay.
Everything except
Um,
Spanish because it's incorporated within the
yes,
DLI program.
that makes sense, Dr. Tu. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, it is to some extent a comment that I have, which is that I am disappointed with I find it unfair public education that we have Spanish on a cart in some schools and music on a cart in some schools, and we're supporting a program that has Spanish and a music room and a music class that's not on a cart. So I am not necessarily opposed to the long-term plans, but I would really like to hear about some of the shorter-term solutions that are affecting our children's education.
Thank you, Katie. And
Um,
we will be addressing those, but this is a long-term planning meeting. So today we're focused on the future.
so my
To,
question for that
yeah.
then is, does the CP expansion, is that because it is DLI? If there was no DLI, would CP be needed to be expanded?
Yes.
Another question that
Yes.
I have long term is that we have building issues at other schools. Littlebrook has issues with some of their sewer system, and could potentially benefit of additional classrooms, and would then be able to address maybe with some of that work some of these sewer issues. Um, so I am still struggling with the long term plan. Yes.
So CP is where the growth is currently, as how we're currently districted. Is that correct? Is that why we're?
Yeah, and if we have, I thought about that a lot too, and you need to think about flexibility, and we're doing something for 10 years and we're this year's board, right? You have to try to think forward. And if, for example, we have significant budget challenges, right? We've tried to describe that to you, but we have almost a $500,000 deficit just from the get-go before you talk about inflation every year, which means we have to find that money and keep offering all the things we offer while they cost more. So it's going to be really difficult the next couple of years. And we don't see any other magic solutions there. So there may be reasons where people say we can't offer this program or that. I don't know the answer to that. But if so, the recommendation we're making is really the one that would be the right one, no matter what. To put all the construction in one place is most effective. You have the center of town, you have a facility that can absorb the growth. It makes sense, no matter which path.
And I'm just going to say that I don't know. I, for whatever reason, was not involved at the time, that the DLI program was started. And I don't know how it also ended up being put in that building that you're describing as the center of town, and such a meaningful building. But I also don't know what reason in the long-term planning, one of the options presented is not to present getting rid of a DLI program.
Okay, thank you, Katie. We can talk more
Thank
about
you. I appreciate all you do. Thank you.
and I'll just say that the DLI program began in 2015, and it was chosen to be at CP because the principal there, Deneen Gruchaz, was the only one who would step up to do it. So again, we're proud of our DLI program. We're just trying to manage all these competing priorities. Let's go to Laura Coley, please.
Hi, thank you. And thanks for all of this presentation tonight. I have a few things to say. I think one thing that I would like to comment on that Daphne mentioned earlier is looking at demographics. And I wonder if an equity lens has been used in this process. The reason I ask that is much of the housing that is being built has an affordable housing component. Much of the affordable housing that already exists is near CP. Or we could make the assumption that it would be redistricted to CP in this plan. And what I think could then happen is that basically all of the socioeconomic diversity that exists within Princeton would be concentrated in one elementary school, while the other three schools become more affluent and remain small. And this is a concern, for a lot of reasons, I think, that are somewhat obvious, but also just overall, CP has a history of being seen as an inferior school within the Princeton Public Schools system in part because of the demographics. This is what I'm told about the history, and the test scores. And the test scores, as we all should know, are heavily tied to affluence. So the more affluent the other elementary schools get, the less affluent CP gets, the bigger discrepancy will be seen in the test scores, and there will be a cycle perpetuated that some of the schools are better than others. So that's one concern I have about the equity perspective and that lens, which I know is, of course, a priority for our district. The next thing I'll say is, I know none of you have elementary school students right now. None of you have upcoming elementary school students. I have 3, including one who will be a kindergartner the year that this program, that this plan is supposed to be in place. Sending a kindergartner to a 600-child school is not something that I think any of you would probably choose to do. I think we all chose Princeton because it's a small town with great community. I think the great community is one of the things that we value most about our schools. So I really question how we can double the size of a school and maintain that community. I know that now when I have my first grader at CP, I call the office, they know who my child is. She's greeted by adults who know who she is by name every day. We go to a school picnic, all of the children are there with their families. We can all fit in one space, which if we double the size of our school, we cannot do. So much of what we value about our schools relies on that community. It relies on the adults knowing our children. It relies on our children knowing the kids that are in their hallways. And so much of that is lost. So I'm really disappointed that the 5-6 school was dismissed. And I think that's an option that would benefit all of our elementary students as well as the middle school. And I'll just finish by saying there's a lot of operating costs associated with doubling the size of the school, I would expect. And basically, that I would hope you would consider all of those costs, as well as the non-monetary costs of losing community, subjecting children to years of construction, reducing the size of their playgrounds, all that type of thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. All right, just going forward, if you could please just say the street that you live on. And we have about, 8 people who want to have questions, and I would like to get them all to speak. So if you could please limit your question to 3 minutes or less, I'd appreciate it. Portia Wong, please.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. So first, I just want to say thank you to members of the Board of Education and everyone who was involved in this. I know what a tremendous amount of work has gone into tonight's presentation. Obviously,
where do you live, Portia? Where do you live?
Oh, you're right. I'm sorry. I live on Snowden Lane. I have 3 children enrolled at Littlebrook.
Thank you. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, so obviously there's no way to make every single Princeton parent happy, but I think this plan will make the most people happy. And so I wanted to voice my support for what the BOE is recommending with the dual track at CP. Princeton's rightly proud of its DLI program, and I really am thrilled that the district has found a solution to keep it. I understand there's frustration from some members of the CP community that CP will not remain exclusively DLI. At the same time, as we've seen tonight, Princeton can't afford, like literally can't afford to pay for everything it wants. And a DLI program is wonderful, but I'm just going to say it. Princeton's children are entitled to a quality public education, but they are not entitled to a DLI education. And so building an additional English language school at the same location is really the only reasonable way for Princeton to maintain this program. So yay, I'm glad we were able to find a way to keep it. Building a larger school at CP will also allow all the schools in the district to enjoy an equitable education with appropriate school facilities. Instead of having classes on carts, every student will get to enjoy the small class sizes, experienced teachers, and adequate classroom space for instruction. And then the last thing that I want to say is that neighborhood schools is a real community value for Princeton residents. And it's kind of a shame that CP has been turning CP zoned students away because they're ineligible for the DLI program for, a variety of reasons. You have to meet certain criteria to be able to even attend in the first place. So it's a wonderful thing to be able to give these children their neighborhood school back. Obviously, it'll also help alleviate some of the population burden at Riverside, Johnson Park, and Littlebrook. And then with CP, as you said, being the center of growth coming into our schools, having a larger school at that location really does make a lot of sense and seems to be the best, the most financially responsible choice as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, next up is Danny Freund. I muted myself.
Hi, I'm gonna voice something very similar to what I shared in a previous forum similar to this. And I want to echo it because I think it's worth mentioning again. So there are two pieces. One is the district went through redistricting a long time ago and chose to move many of the children that are currently in the Jackson Witherspoon neighborhood to the Johnson Park neighborhood. And my question is what is being done to assess if that's working? Is it not working? So before we talk about redistricting, I think it's important that we empower the community to know why that was done and is it working or not. The second thing is, as we consider, there's attrition that occurs naturally because of the DLI program. So I think there seemed to be a lot of support for having the younger grades at CP be DLI only, so kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and then allowing one class to be a traditional class in grades 2, 3, 4, and 5. That would, I think, first of all, could be a short-term solution because it could be implemented as early possibly as next year. But also, it would allow people to continue to stay at their community school. It would encourage DLI for those who are currently, wanting DLI at community park. And it would alleviate some of the pressures of the uneven distribution within each of the schools. There seems to be some support within community park. I've heard a lot of support from other schools for this idea. And I was surprised to hear that that isn't one of the considerations being considered, in the short term.
This is just a long term.
Okay, thank you, Danny. Next up is Brenda Frazier.
Hi, I live on Random Road. My name's Brenda Frazier. I have a son at Little Brook and a daughter now at Princeton Middle School who spent 6 years at Little Brook. And I just wanted to, I think, reiterate a lot of what Portia said. So I don't want to belabor that, but I think it's wonderful that there's a way to keep DLI, but that it also is just, I'm so pleased, and I really want to thank the board and all the planners for using such a logical and rational approach to maximizing the sort of net good for everyone. And remembering that more than 75% of our elementary students are not in the DLI program. And so we do need to make sure that they're getting a good, solid education with spaces for all of their programs. And I just appreciate that the very logical approach to that, and understanding that we can't afford as a community, that we don't have the budget or the resources to do some of the maybe best things that we might want to do in terms of building, and that we all have to make some compromises in order to stay within the parameters of what we have to work with. So I just wanted to thank you very much. And thanks.
Okay, thank you, Brenda. Next up is Kip Berman.
Unmute. Hey, I'm Kip. I live at 73 Birch Avenue. Thank you for your time and your work on behalf of our children. I wanted to share my thoughts and speak unequivocally against the idea of creating a 2-in-1 gargantuan elementary school at Community Park. I live across the street from Community Park, where my daughter is a happy second grader and my son will begin DLI kindergarten next year. We bought in this neighborhood for walkability to the school and for the incredible DLI program. From a practical and logistics perspective, more than doubling the amount of traffic and parking required to serve 600 plus students, not to mention vastly increased faculty and staff, is simply not tenable or desirable. When you factor the reduced playground size and open space that is essential to students' health and well-being, coupled with vastly increased usage, it's a raw deal for our children and our historic neighborhood. even with the most thoughtful of construction ideas. But more importantly, trying to forge community in a school in which you would essentially have separated 40% of the students, denormalized learning in Spanish, where once it was just what everyone did, and created what I can only term a segregated student population that would never truly share class time, friendships, or identity, seems so flawed that I'm surprised the idea has even gotten to this point. It seems both impractical and, to be frank, in poor taste to transform DLI at CP from the de facto norm with all its attendant benefits to a minority niche community. There is a condemned building that once was the site of a school on Valley Road. Is the district's plan to just let that building rot into eternity, or can we acknowledge that since any responsible person would agree it needs to be torn down at some point, and we need a new location to build, that the overwhelmingly clear choice is to tear down the condemned building and use that location to create a new school, maybe for 5th and 6th graders, as mentioned. In short, building this two-headed monstrosity at CP, where we currently have an intimate, thriving, unified, and growing, that's important, growing DLI community that is being scapegoated unfairly for the district's overcrowding issues, while the district is not addressing the condemned elephant rotting in plain sight, is, in my view, the wrong decision. Tear down Valley Road. I know it's expensive, but Princeton's rich. We can afford it. And preserve our beloved Community Park Elementary School and beloved and growing DLI community at Community Park. And thank you guys all for your service. I know it's not super fun to have these roles and responsibilities. Anyway, have a good night.
Thank you, Kip. So I just want to add, first of all, the long-term planning committee looked at a 5-6 school. There's that option is very appealing, and there's a lot of issues that go along with that. So I have confidence that our board members and administrators and planners looked at that option and ruled it out for logistical and financial reasons. I also want to say I understand that CP projected in 2027 with I think an additional 8 to 12 new classrooms, expanded facilities, et cetera, will be close to 600 students. Last year, Johnson Park and Littlebrook had about 425 students. Littlebrook has smaller square footage than Johnson Park. And as one of the, so those schools have that enrollment right now, and we haven't had the ability to upgrade, the cafeteria or other areas for those kids. Next up is Erica Snyder.
Hi, thanks. My name is Erica Snyder, and I am at 629 Lawrenceville Road. I have 3 kids that are at Community Park, though we are zoned for Johnson Park. My question really, my question stems from the first statement on the slide was minimize staff, student, or maybe it was the last on the slide, I can't remember, slide number 1, minimize staff, student, and family disruption. And I'm wondering what the conversations with the city have looked like in this massive plan, as the city has said that they are going to undergo a massive transformation of Community Park South, getting rid potentially of the only parking lot that exists at Community Park South. So if we're thinking about minimizing disruption, and we know the city is going to build, and we know you all want to build, and we know that the Witherspoon Road can't sustain that sort of traffic. We know there's no parking for the students that already attend. We know the municipal building doesn't like when we park there, and they usually don't have parking on days when court is in session. And we know this building was built in 1962, so what's our asbestos situation happening in this building? How long is it going to take for abatement? It is a messy, loud, long, dirty, unhealthy process. So my youngest is in kinder, she'll still be there when this program is put into place, assuming it passes. And I'm just really wondering how that is minimizing staff, student, and family, and frankly, the neighborhood. The neighborhood can't handle that much construction. what are the conversations with the city and looking at this plan and their plan, and how is that actually helpful to a bunch of kids who are going to have to sit in the classroom, because we know you can't build this building or this addition only in the summertime. It's not going to be a thing as much as you might want it to be a thing. So I'm really curious, like, what are those conversations? What have they looked like? Because it seems also very disruptive to the learning process for the whole school.
George, would you give us just a quick thumbnail of kind of how you see next steps? Because you really taught us a lot about this. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. So it's construction, and yeah, it's going to be disruptive. Unfortunately, all construction is, but I think the approaches that are going to be looked at for both community park and the middle school will allow substantial space to be constructed without really inconveniencing too much of the school. I'm not going to say any inconvenience, because all construction is inconvenient. I just want to make that clear to everyone. But to minimize the amount of disruption and to hopefully create that new space, and then do those renovations when we have that new space available for swing space. Okay. And what that will look like right now, I don't know, but I can tell you we've done many projects like this, and every project's a little bit unique. And we've done many projects in towns like Princeton as well, in a tight, suburban urban settings, and we're used to projects like that. So it's really a matter of studying the school and figuring out an approach that allow us to build some space, which we did in Hopewell Valley when we built the addition on the front of Hopewell Valley High School, and when we built on the back, and all the projects in West Windsor Plainsboro. I mean, every single one of those, we managed to run the schools while we were doing substantial construction, and we did substantial construction in West Windsor Plainsboro at $115 million, and we can do it here too. All right, small projects, bigger projects. We will have the expertise to, figure out a way to shepherd them. And I have some ideas about that already.
So I appreciate your answer, but that's actually not what I asked. I asked what was the city's involvement and what have the conversations been with the city about this plan, because of the implications of disrupting the community and the infrastructure surrounding Community Park.
Yeah, I know some conversations took place with the the township that I wasn't involved in. So, but I know the school has discussed it with the people from the
Okay.
town. And
If we could, thank you, George. If we can move on, Beth Lehman, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm juggling, making dinner and all that kind of stuff. But first, I just want to thank you for all the work. I mean, it's so complicated. There's so many variables. There's so many interests. So there's no easy solution to any of this. Excuse me. I just wondered, so I grew up in Chatham, New Jersey, where we had our middle school was 5 to 8, and the 5th grade was kind of separate. And then once we reached 6th grade, we transitioned. I'm just wondering if there's any, and then so they had that for a while, and then when the borough and the township consolidated, they had separate schools, but now they just approved redoing that so that they will have a 5 to 8. I'm just wondering if that's something that's worthwhile considering. I know, again, there's so many expenses, there's so many variables involved. So I do really appreciate that. And this is not an easy task for anybody, especially the BOE. So I'm just posing that. I also feel like I'm a little bit offended by the comment about the wealth of Princeton. There's so many people in Princeton that aren't wealthy, and a lot of the people that are wealthy send their kids to private schools. So this is like not, I just don't think I'm offended by that comment. So that's just my statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. And I'll just say when we looked at the 5-6 school back in 2018, one of the things we really liked about it is that 5th graders, you would take them out from the K-5, and 6th graders you would take out from the middle school, and they're really, developmentally very similar, right? Because there's a big difference between a 5th grader and a kindergartner, and there's a big difference between a 6th grader and an 8th grader, right? So, but then to have fifth graders and eighth graders, I mean, that's a concern as well, right? So we're trying to keep our kids as young for as long as possible, and society is not making that easy. But I think that's one of the reasons that we, that hasn't been on the table here. Just given the wide, the variety of development in those ages. But thanks for your comment, Beth. Abigail, and again, if you could just please tell me the street you live on, we appreciate it. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Abigail Kallenbach. I live on Orchard Circle. I have two children. One is a second grader at Community Park, and the other one is in the threes program at the YWCA. I'm really happy to be in the district and to be utilizing the DLI. And even more so than the DLI, I really appreciate the community aspect at CP and how we have a close-knit community of people there. And I am seconding other concerns by CP parents about increasing, almost doubling the school size to 600 students and how that's going to affect the overall community there. I also have concerns as to the differential sizes in the schools compared to the other schools. I hear that there's right now at Littlebrook and at Riverside, I guess it's over 400 students in those classes or in the schools. And so presumably they're going to be having smaller classes going forward once CP has doubled, or are you expecting to maintain at the 400? Okay. But it's still going to be a 50% difference in school sizes, and that will have an effect on the kids when they are going on to the middle schools or in those classes to have the feeling of being in a bigger school versus smaller school. I've got questions though with regards to whether the board has considered all of the facilities that are needed to be updated with an increased student body size, including like the bathroom facilities and stuff in CP, and whether that cost of those additional facilities, is that taken into account versus, starting the 5-6 school fresh across the street. And to
like gyms, libraries, cafeterias, playgrounds, everything has to be expanded to meet the needs of a larger student population. So it wouldn't be just adding on a wing of classrooms. You'd have to be able to renovate the school to have this sufficient shared spaces to be able to accommodate that size of a classroom, of a size.
Yeah, and I just want to make sure that we're keeping in mind that there's might be increased needs for gender neutral bathrooms and as such moving forward. And also the traffic in and around CP is another concern. I'm picking up kids through the car line is I think probably atrocious in any of the schools, but the traffic around that area is pretty bad. And to Kit Berman's point about having the increased traffic flow through that neighborhood, I think would be a huge burden on the community around there. And so I am hoping that the school board will, the BOE will reconsider the 5-6 option, even though that is an expense, but it would keep the schools at parity across with sizes and keep the community feeling in each of the schools.
Right.
Thank you very much for all the work that you guys are doing, and appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you, Abigail. So we have 22 minutes left before we let our administrators go home before they have to turn around quickly. Let's go with Elizabeth. Then we have some questions in the chat. The long-term planning committee will be at the middle school at 9 o'clock on Saturday morning. You can come out then.
Hi, this is Elizabeth. I live on Laurel Circle. I have two children in Littlebrook. Very discreet question. Whenever the year that the new configuration does open, will there be an exception for rising fifth graders and siblings such that they can stay in their current school? This was an exception in that plan that didn't end up going forward last fall when there was going to be the big JPCP thing. That's the end of my question.
Thank you. And I'll say, I don't think we've gotten into those details yet, but
Well, I can say that we have a policy that says we'll do everything we can to make that happen. So if we can't make that happen, we'll explain why, but our policy is that we will make that happen.
We want to do what's in the best interest of kids, and obviously moving a fifth grader does not meet that goal. All right, thanks. Next up, who's up next? And again, we have 20 minutes and there's like 6 more questions. So if you could just please say the street you live on and just keep your question brief, we'd appreciate it. The next up is Hochul. Is that right? Hochul? Apologize if I'm mispronouncing that.
Hi, my name is actually Jocelyn Lee. I'm just listening through the phone. I'm a senior at PHS. And I just wanted to, again, acknowledge that equity is at the top of our list in terms of goals for the board with this CP plan. And it's my understanding that with the Witherspoon Jackson and the new affordable housing plans into place, CP will become the highest percentage of students who are like in the free and reduced lunch plans, and just generally the lowest socioeconomic status.
That's not necessarily true. I'm just going to stop you right there.
Okay.
Not necessarily true.
Okay, just for the sake of argument, then, if that does happen and it's going to be the largest school, I just feel like that equity might not last in that sort of environment is all. Is there
Thank you for
anything?
that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, next up, Lindsay Weiss.
Hi, how are you? I'm Lindsay Weiss. I live on Edgerstone Road. I have 2 kids at Johnson Park and 1 in the middle school. My question, I guess you said at the beginning of the presentation, very clearly highlighting in green this one plan that the board plans to, be recommending and moving forward. How much more room for discussion? Will there be more conversations with individual schools, or really at the end of the day, is this something that you plan to move forward with?
So as I was saying before, there's a meeting, the next meeting is on Saturday morning, 9 o'clock at the middle school. We're here to, run the schools and do what we think is the best interests of the community. Beth and Brian, I don't know if there's anything you want to add there. Okay, I'll just move on.
Oh, wait, I want to add something.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm
Brian's
happy to
gonna
add.
talk.
Unless
Brian is gonna
Brian or
say,
Beth.
Jean, would you
Brian?
let Brian as chair talk?
Yes,
Thanks.
please.
So just to remind people of the process, the current plan is to ask the board to approve this recommendation so that our planners at significant expense and time and investment can begin to fully develop these plans. And during that process, there will continue to be community discussion, and it's likely that sometime in February, if the plans are satisfactory to the board and to the community, we would be voting as a board to submit them to the state. And then in approximately May, Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, we would be asking the board to approve a referendum question. So there's still quite a number of steps in front of us and more opportunity to get answers to some of the excellent questions that have been asked.
Yeah, it would be about May. The state has added on 14 days to the process with the change in the voting laws that they sprung on unsuspecting districts this about what 6-8 weeks ago, 10 weeks ago.
And I just want to jump in. I think also partially what she was asking was, I think they're and I think if you go 9 o'clock to the middle school, they can walk you better again through kind of why the other options were eliminated. A lot of it comes down to cost. I saw a thing in the chat, are we going to tear down CP? We can't afford to tear down CP. We can't we will not be tearing down CP. And I think as you go through this, and please talk to us, reach out to us individually, reach out to things, but there's certain cost factors and that really constrain what we're able to do. We have a very, very, very tight operating budget, and it affects everything that we do.
All right,
Thank you.
The
That's
last,
very helpful.
Yep, the last question is going to be Chris Santarpio, and then we'll try to answer one or two questions in the chat.
and Michelle has a.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, Michelle, go ahead. I think Chris dropped.
Okay, I just wanted to, I know there's been a lot of comments about equity and about concerns about a overabundance of low income and free or reduced lunch students at CP. I think the first thing that's important to understand is that every child that lives in a low income housing development in this town gets on a bus. The diversity in this district is born on the backs of those children who get on a bus every day. So it, you know, this fear somehow that we're going to take all the housing developments and place all those kids in CP is really unfounded. The second thing I'd like to say is that I invite anybody that wants to talk about equity or who wants to talk about how this potential plan could potentially impact that population of students or any other population of students. I'm happy to have that conversation. Both of my kids went to CP. I live in the CP neighborhood. And for several years, my neighbors and I have not had a neighborhood school. So we haven't walked anywhere for the most part unless we're in the DLI program. So it's a great conversation. I think some of these concerns are unfounded, but I'm happy to have a conversation about it because equity is my number one concern. And as my colleagues will attest, I raise that issue all the time in long-term facilities planning and everywhere else that I can. So I'm all for having that conversation.
All right, thank you, Michelle. Chris?
Good evening. Thank you, everybody, for on long-term planning. I'm curious a few things. With all the growth, who at the district or the Board of Ed is working with the town in terms of the pilot programs? Is anyone working with them and securing some additional funding to help operate or measure that gap? Also, you know, I'm concerned some of the data and projections that are still being used, with all due respect, Mike. Even the current enrollment is off for CP. So we last spring there was some issues with the data projections and the data. So still see that. And I firmly believe that no Princeton elementary school should be pitted against each other. I firmly believe that we'll all be together in the middle school. If Littlebrook needs some trailers, get some trailers for Littlebrook. Right? I understand the operational cost, but they can be moved around. But no school in elementary in Princeton should be kids where there's not even a seat, in my opinion. And you know, a famous quote is life happens when you're busy making plans. What is plan B if this referendum doesn't pass next year? What is plan B?
So first, a group of us are in talks with the town for pilot money. It's ongoing. There hasn't been, you know, any resolution. There's not a lot of extra pilot money, you know, lying around, but it is something that we continue to work on. And just so you know, Chris, last I checked, a trailer cost about $400,000 a year, and that would have to come either out of our reserves or the operating budget, and we don't have that money. And
by the way, I'm a CP parent, if anyone. I didn't say
okay.
a word on Nassau, so sorry.
Thank you, Chris. So we would probably need more than one trailer. So, and JP would probably need trailers too. So we're looking at 2 to 4 trailers at a cost of $400,000 plus installation.
Daphne, I want to clarify that the current referendum this November is not at all related to this planning.
Yes, okay. I know that, Gene.
Yes.
I
okay,
talked
thank
about
you.
the subsequent.
Just want to be clear. Okay,
And,
thanks.
And Chris, as Mike noted earlier, we will be updating the numbers in the month of November, and we'll be reporting on those publicly and understand that CP feels that there are opportunities to look at those numbers again, and we will.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you everyone for coming out tonight. I just want to go through the chat really quick to see if there's any questions that we haven't covered. Do we have any information about the middle school addition? What's the projection for the student body there? And just briefly, what would we be doing there?
The middle school is projected to be a little over 900 in a few years. The current plan would be to expand the cafeteria, which at the current 800, just under 800 now, but it goes up and down. Last year it was 825. It's too small. They need a second gym, and a few other class rooms is the current plan. We're looking at the corridor can't be enclosed between the E and C wings, I think, because of egress laws, but we're going to cover it like was proposed 5 years ago. That's basically the bones of the plan at the middle school.
Yeah, and the long-term planning committee has asked George and his team and Matt and Kim to also work to make sure that there's some headroom at the middle school, because we really can't see the future beyond about 4 to 5 years. And just like in the elementary schools, we would want there to be room for some expansion so the future boards would have time to come up with their own plans, depending on how the town continues to grow.
Now, I'll just say that, when I first got on the board, I thought, why don't we plan for 15 to 20 years? The university plans out 30 years, right? School boards are not able to do that because the demographic information we get is at max 5 years. After 3 years, it becomes much more speculative. We don't have the data, and we are not in a position to do that type of long planning. We can kind of think about, like we are now, the planning that we do to make it flexible so that future boards have more options. That's the way we've approached it. But if we try to bite off more than we can chew, it's just not going to fly. We don't have the data to support it.
Yeah, thank you, Beth. I just want to say, so what was the teachers, what was it? Where's that question? What was the teacher's reaction to the plan? So Beth, Brian, Dr. Kelly, and myself and Betsy were at the PAC a few weeks ago when they presented this plan to the teachers, and there was applause from a large group of teachers when the plan was presented. The long-term planning committee, we're not going to do anything without any major decision in this district without involving the staff. So overall, not everyone was pleased, but a large majority was. I think that's everything. So I just want to say, I'm going to turn it back over to Beth and Brian. We do have a referendum on the ballot for November 7th. That referendum is for security and safety upgrades. We are going to add a secure vestibule at the PAC entrance at the high school. We're going to upgrade the internet Wi-Fi capabilities. We're going to do window film for all schools, security film. We're going to increase the Wi-Fi, the bandwidth at Johnson Park. Right now, the Verizon service is not reliable. And if, God forbid, there's an emergency there, just even an illness, we're not sure that they can right now contact emergency services. It's something that the principal at Johnson Park has brought up much of the time. And then there are improvements to all 4 playgrounds. Am I missing anything, Beth and Brian, Susan?
The network infrastructure would benefit all 6 schools. You're talking about the cell repeaters at Johnson Park and the middle school.
Yeah.
Security vestibules, doors and locks, middle school and high.
Okay.
Allows us to $5 million in state funding that we otherwise wouldn't have for the projects, and we don't have the money to do them without it.
Yeah, and Daphne, I didn't, if you mentioned it, I missed it, but we'd be replacing the turf field and
I forgot about that. The turf field and
the track, which are both very close to their end of life. They're usually projected for 10 years. The turf was installed in 2014. And if the referendum passes, it would be replaced in 2025 after 11 years. Last year, there were $4,000 of emergency repairs made to the turf and patching to the surface of the track. So they both absolutely positively need to be replaced and resurfaced. And there would also be some modest enhancements to the pool.
Oh, right. Yes, also safety.
And there's a Zoom about this topic.
Yes, I was going to say, so right Saturday, there's another conversation at 9 a.m. at the middle school. Next Wednesday, the 18th, there is a conversation about the November referendum. It'll be a Zoom meeting, and that link will be posted. And Brian and Beth, I will turn it over to you to close the meeting.
Brian? I have a dog that's going crazy. I apologize for the barks.
Well, so this is the first of 2 community discussions. So we look forward to seeing some people in person. And many of us are willing to meet, with smaller groups, if that would be helpful. I know our administrators and professionals are also can be available for some of those meetings. But again, just to express my gratitude to the committee, to the administration, and to our professionals who've been working hard on and off for 5 years, but very intensely for the last 6 months. And this is a process. This is a journey, and what we have now is what we think is the plan that there's no perfect plan, but this one we think balances the interests and ultimately will be best for the district and our school children. And we're grateful for the significant engagement of the community, and look forward to continuing the discussion.
And yeah, I do too. And there's a lot of concern in the comments about what does it mean to be a dual track school? How do those two schools within a school work together? That's all to be determined. And how do we make that? How do we make sure we're achieving the small school feel in CP? I think it can be done. And we need to work on that as we go. We choose this model we think makes the most sense structurally for the district. Then there's going to be a lot of further discussions on what does that actually look like? And how do people who are in the building now, what inputs do you have on that? So there's a lot more to go. This is really the first step. And we really appreciate everything that was brought up tonight.
Yep. Thank you to the professionals who joined us tonight, George and Mike. Thank you to Matt for all your work on this. Kim and Dr. Kelly, thank you for joining us. Thank you to the board for coming on this extra meeting. We have our regular board meeting next Tuesday beginning at 7:30. And again, if you have more questions, please come out on Saturday. The long-term planning committee will be there, to answer as many questions as they can. So thank you, everyone. Good night.